Welcome to Conversations. I'm Scott Marlowe, and we're about to have a conversation with my friend of 10 years, Charlie Carlson, author of Weird Florida. There's a lot more to Charlie than his book, Weird Florida, now adapted to television in Weird Florida, Roads Less Traveled, which has aired here on WDSC-TV, PBS, Daytona Beach. Charlie, what is it that attracts you personally to weird stuff?
I don't know really, but I would say that it's because I like mysteries, and sometime back I was a historian writing history books, and I used to find these crazy news items in old newspapers, and they fascinated me, and I wanted to know if these things were true. But I like roadside oddities, but then there was my grandmother. She could spin some very scary ghost tales. And then when I was a kid, I loved circus sideshows. I loved to stand out there and look at the banners, at the sword swallower, the fire eater. So I've always been fascinated with the offbeat world. And, you know, a lot of this stuff is really part of the fabric that makes up the American culture. So I like to present these weird things to people, either in TV shows or in books or live shows, because I think we all like weird things. We all like mysteries.
So when did your trip down the road less traveled actually begin?
Well, I've been doing this most of my life in one way or the other, and after I wrote the book Weird Florida, which has been a bestseller, I had a lot of offers, you know, for doing a TV show. Probably about 30 people approached me, and most of them didn't have any connections with being able to produce a show like that. And then PBS comes along. And of course, PBS is one of my favorite networks. I watch it all the time. And I said, I think I'll go with PBS. And then, so we struck out to do Weird Florida, Roads Less Travel last February, in February 2009.
We're surrounded by some posters from your performances. And, you know, when and where did you start performing?
Well, I actually first appeared on stage when I was 14 years old with the great Harry Wise, which was a magician which recently passed away. He was born and raised in Sanford, and he was one of the great entertainers to emerge from Central Florida, and he carried his show, which was called the Weird and Wacky Show, across the United States and parts of Canada. And so he was the one that put me on the stage for the first time in the Ritz Theater in Sanford as a stooge. Now, a stooge is a magician's plant in an audience. When they call for a volunteer, the stooge is already programmed to do an act on stage. He looks like a member of the audience, but he really isn't. Well, that's what I did, and I did that for very cheap labor. I think I got like a free ticket or free pass to movies and free snacks from the snack bar. But that was when I really got started on stage, and then in later life, I produced music festivals, that sort of thing. So that's how I got started with it.
They say you can tell a lot about a man by the way he lives. Recently, King's Eye Productions sent a crew out to Charlie's house to get the lay of the land. Let's take a look at this footage.
Okay, 6 minutes left in package.
I'm supposed to tear.
I lived in New Smyrna Beach for the past 18 years after I retired from the Army. I share my house with 4 cats, a squirrel, and Miss Scarlet, my boxer dog, and my daughter. My grandfather was a Swedish celery farmer, and he came to Florida in 1912. And that's when Seminole County, that's where I'm from. I was born and raised in Sanford. It used to be the celery capital of the country. On my mother's side of the family, it goes back 10 generations, so that makes me a 10th generation Floridian down my mother's lines. My property is a certified wildlife habitat certified by the National Federation of Wildlife. And this was my late wife's idea. She was a wildlife rehabilitator. She was an environmentalist, and so she did not want to remove any of the trees. So I don't really have much landscape per se. It's mostly wild Florida wilderness. I think that there should be a connection between man and nature. There should be a spiritual connection, and I try to do this on my property. And so I have a lot of things like feeders for the animals around. I have wind chimes and things that just kind of remind me of the spiritual aspects of what nature is all about. My wife was also in show business with me. We had an illusion show that we took up through the country, all the way up through Illinois and Kentucky and Alabama and Tennessee. She often performed on stage with me as my assistant. We operated a sideshow together, a circus-style sideshow, and she was always involved with some aspect of show business with me. She supported me in my show business. She supported me while I was in the military for many years. And on the other hand, I would support her in her political and environmental pursuits. So we actually worked as a team. You know, we got along very well. Well, I have to say that in my opinion that I made a wrong turn years ago. I had planned to join the circus, and I had worked for carnivals and circuses as a teenager, and during the Vietnam War, when the draft was on, somebody had other ideas for me and decided I should be a soldier. So I ended up in the military with the intentions of not spending very much time at all in there. I'd been in military school at one time, so I didn't really care for the military. Ended up spending 25 years in the military and going through 4 different wars. And military never did appeal to me, even though that I retired a sergeant major and was recalled to active duty. So I actually retired twice from the Army. But as a military family, we hardly speak of it. We don't really care for the military. We're peace activists. And that may sound a little strange, but because people have a hard time trying to add all of this up. But it's, you know, this is America. This is why we served in there, is to have the freedom of expression and present our views. And I just, the experience I had with the Army and the places I went and some of the things that I saw, I didn't think was right. I think we did things that we shouldn't have done. So consequently, I've spent a lot of times in peace marches. But like I say, people have a hard time adding all of that up, because here I am, a retired sergeant major with an illustrious military career, which a lot of people don't know about. And at the same time, on the side, I was in show business and in private enterprise, and that's kind of hard for people to add up too. How in the world did you do all of this stuff? Well, I did, you know. I guess I'm kind of weird.
Charlie, why celery?
That looks like a good stalk of celery you got there. Well, remember I told you that my background was a historian. I wrote a history book on celery. That was my first book. Actually, it wasn't really a book. It was more like a pamphlet, but it was based on my grandfather's days as a celery farmer in Seminole County, when Seminole County used to be the nation's celery capital. So I grew up on a celery farm. Celery was part of my upbringing. You know, when I was a kid, you would go outside and you could just smell celery in the air. It was all over the place. Today, you won't find any celery at all in Seminole County, but that looks pretty good there.
Well, tell us a little bit about your family background. You've mentioned your grandfather.
Well, my grandfather, my paternal grandparents came from Sweden. They were Swedish immigrants and settled in the Seminole County area when it was Orange County back around 1909, and quickly became engaged in celery farming and other vegetable farms. And then on my maternal lineage, my mother's side of the family, they go back 10 generations in Florida. So that makes me a 10th generation Floridian, which sort of makes me a walking oddity in this state, which is now populated by 90% of the people are from someplace else. But they were known as the Florida Pioneers, Florida Crackers. That was that side of the family. So when I grew up with two cultures. One was the Florida Pioneer culture, and the other was the Swedish culture. So we kind of combined the two. You know, we spoke Swedish with a southern accent.
That had to be that had to be a sight to see. How did your book Weird Florida come about?
Well, I had written several books on Central Florida's history, and then I got into writing books on strange phenomena. What I found out about writing history books and trying to market a history book is that they sell very, very slow. You got to love history to buy a history book. But then one day in 1997, I put out a book called Strange Florida, and the book sold something like 10,000 copies the first year. So I knew I was writing the wrong stuff. People didn't want to read about history. They wanted to read about weird things. And that led to me writing for Weird US, which was a combination of writers, and I wrote all the Florida parts that went into that book, and then later they approached me and asked me to write my own book, Weird Florida, and I didn't think it would, I knew it would do good, but I didn't think it would do as well as it has, and it's, I think it's sold something like 500,000 copies now, so I think that tells us something about what people like. You know, we like mysteries and offbeat things.
Well, for the benefit of our viewing audience, here's a sample of Weird Florida Roads Less Traveled, courtesy of WLRN PBS in Miami.
Hi, I'm Charlie Carlson, Florida's master of the weird, and this is my traveling companion, Miss Scarlet. Miss Scarlet has a nose for the weird, and pork chops too. And we're on a quest to find Florida's most wackiest and weird places. We're on the road again, this time to visit the friendliest small town in Florida, Lake Wales. But as charming as it looks, it has a spooky geography. There's a spot here where gravity seems to be reversed. I'm talking to Scott Marlowe from the Pangea Institute, an organization that studies about weird things. Is that correct?
That's for sure.
Well, we've got a weird thing here at Spook Hill, and I'd like to hear some more about the history of this place.
Well, a Seminole Indian chief, who was apparently a great warrior, did battle with an alligator that was terrorizing his village near here. And after a long and protracted battle, defeated the gator by killing it. Shortly thereafter, this sinkhole over here opened up, this little sinkhole lake. And they say that that's where the gator descended into the netherworld. But the interesting thing about the story is that it attributes this phenomenon of the hill where the gator is trying to pull people into the sinkhole and the Indian chief is trying to pull them away.
So the question is, does this hill defy gravity?
Well, I think it's probably an optical illusion.
An optical illusion.
It's
Okay.
this is a gravity hill that's a very common occurrence in many parts of the country. Back when we had our own version of the Pony Express, the riders who rode through here noticed that their horses labored apparently going downhill. The citrus cart operators also noticed that their horses were straining apparently going downhill, and that's pretty much where the word Spook Hill came from. It was a very spooky occurrence, so naturally they attributed it to some kind of ghost.
So I don't know whether I've been fooled or not fooled.
Charlie, tell us about your co-star in Roads Less Traveled.
You're talking about Miss Scarlet, my boxer. Miss Scarlet is a rescued dog. When she was a puppy, she was tied in a backyard. She went without food and water for days, and two ladies rescued her from her ordeal and asked me if I would be willing to take her in. I had a large boxer at the time, and I said, well, why not? Every other animal comes to me and lives at my place. You know, I feel like a zookeeper sometimes. So I took Miss Scarlet in, and she's been with me ever since. And she's been in actually 3 movies. She had parts in 3 movies.
Amazing. I hear she gets more fan mail than you do.
Yeah, she gets all the fan mail, you know. So, but people like dogs, you know. That was my producer's idea to include Miss Scarlet. That was a last-minute thought, and it worked. I mean, people, they just love the dog in there.
Is she difficult to work with?
No, she's her own dog, but she's fairly easy to work with. She doesn't like cameras, though, because she kind of gets tired of them being put in her face, you know. She shies back a little bit, but other than that, she's good to travel with and everything.
Now, I hear from the FMPTA that they're going to do a production of your book, Ashley's Shadow, the Florida Motion Picture and Television Association.
There is some consideration for doing a production based on that book, yes. So that's in the planning right now.
Well, why don't you tell our audience what the story's about?
Ashley's Shadow is the only novel that I have ever engaged in, and it's based on the haunting of Ashley's restaurant in Rockledge, Florida. And they're not shy about telling their ghost story there. If you go into that restaurant, it's on the back of the menu, and I've done a couple of documentaries from that place. But they have a lot of poltergeist activity there, meaning dishes flying off of shelves and lights flickering, that sort of thing. And I wrote a story based on that haunting that's a combination romance, murder mystery, and a ghost story. And I wrote it mainly for women. And so all my proofreaders were women as I was writing this thing. And it was kind of a back burner thing that I was doing while I was writing another book. But it's a sweet story. I think it would make a good TV show.
Interesting, real interesting. Well, now, what other projects are you engaged in right now?
Well, we do things with Ripley's, believe it or not, in St. Augustine. In April, we've got a big event coming up on April the 17th weekend where it's free. We have outside entertainment. We have some unusual exhibits. We do a 24-hour marathon radio broadcast from there. And I'm also co-owner of Shadows Media. We publish this magazine, Mysteries Magazine. I don't know if you've seen it, but you should subscribe, though. As a matter of fact, it looks like Scott Marlowe has written an article in here. Yeah, that's you.
Last I heard.
Well, I'll have to read that then. But Mysteries Magazine is ours, and that's we're proud to say that it ranks as the leading magazine having to do with unexplained phenomena and mysteries in North America. So this keeps us pretty busy, too.
Well, you're busy building a media empire, then.
Yes, well, we're trying to. We also have a radio show, Shadows in the Dark Radio, which is an internet-based radio show. We want to enlarge that, expand it into a regular network, 24/7 network. And so we're working on that, too. So we've got a lot of irons in the fire, and most likely we'll do some more PBS work, too.
Well, I've heard that you're planning to take the one-hour show and turn it into a regular series. Is that something that's
this
in
is
the
one of
offing?
the things that we're considering right now, is to going to a series of 30-minute shows. And certainly there's more weird stuff out there to find. I mean, I would love to be able to go out through the whole southeastern portion of the country and go to weird places that I know about and bring it to the screen for people to enjoy. And think about it this way: it saves a lot of gas for me to go out there and find these places and show it to you, rather than you having to go out and drive with the gas prices like they are. But most of these places you can actually go and see for yourself. So we bring this to the viewing audience so they can plan their vacations or road trips around it.
Well, what would you say is the weirdest thing you've seen in the state of Florida?
Other than you?
We know the answer to that one.
Eating celery? I like Coral Castle. Coral Castle is a mystery. It's Florida's Stonehenge. It's down in Homestead. And there's a big mystery of how Ed Leedscaleman, who was the builder of this strange place, was able to build this thing. You know, it's built out of 1,100 tons of coral rock, and this guy didn't have any kind of tools or anything that could even lift that stuff or cut it, and yet he was able to do it. He only weighed 100 pounds. He had TB. He had a 4th grade education. So he built this marvelous structure there, and nobody knows how he did this. So I think that's the classic weird place in Florida, and you can go visit it. It's a tourist attraction.
Are you thinking in terms of taking over the Weird US franchise?
No, those guys got me started in the weird business, at least in the weird media side of the business. I've had side shows and things like that too, but they are my mentors, I guess, have been. We still work hand in hand with them. I'm still part of the Weird series, the Weird Writers series.
Now, if you expanded the weirdness to the Southeast in general, because I know you do a whole lot of driving up and down that 95 corridor,
Oh, I do.
You know, North Carolina and all that. What would be the weirdest thing in the Southeast that you've encountered?
The weirdest thing in the Southeast that you can go see, I mean, there's some stories that you can't really present anything, they're just legends, but probably the Georgia Guidestones. Outside of Elberton, Georgia. This looks like a Stonehenge thing too. And it's a mystery as to where the money came from and who the group was that set this thing up. It sits out in a cow pasture where you wouldn't expect something like this to be. And I think that's pretty weird. And it's kind of a new weird thing because this thing was built in the 1980s. So there's a lot of controversy that surrounds it. Some people say it was built by satanic worshipers, and other people say it was built by this group or that group. So nobody really knows for sure.
Well, with the magazine now and the radio show and the other things that you've mentioned and all of your various activities, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Being weird, doing the same thing. Yeah, I love presenting weird and unusual entertainment to audiences, be it on stage or in an event or a TV show or talking about it on radio or whatever. We just enjoy doing this. I enjoy doing it. You know, I'm not going to say I do it for free, but I do a lot of free stuff, but it's kind of like a hobby that pays for itself. You know, it gives me something to do. It keeps me out of trouble, keeps me weird. And, you know, the great thing about it is that there's a lot of history involved in it. And if you read a lot of my books or even watch some of my shows, there's history there to be learned that's hidden somewhere inside of some of these legends. And I always thought when I was a kid studying history in school that history was a very boring subject, that somebody needed to make it entertaining. And so I think we do that. We give it a weird twist, and that way you learn a little bit about history too.
That's an interesting point. So what is your educational background?
Well, I have a college degree with a major in history, and I've studied anthropology, so whether that makes me smart, I don't know. You can't study weirdology, you know. You can't go to school to study weirdology. That has to come naturally. But basically, my background is in anthropology and history.
Now, you've mentioned animals. You've mentioned hunting weird things. What other hobbies do you have besides the weird?
I spend all my time hunting weird stuff, yeah. But I'm an environmentalist. I believe in protecting Florida's environment. We're losing so much of it to development, and it's having a great impact on our ecology. So I'm very active as an environmentalist, so that keeps me busy too.
Well, in terms of the environmental, you're involved with ECART, aren't you?
Yeah, that's Edgewater Citizens Alliance.
Edgewater Citizens for?
Edgewater Citizens Alliance for Responsible Development, which is a part of the Florida Hometown Democracy Movement, which will have Amendment 4 on the ballot in 2009, which will, if voted in, it will allow people to vote on development that impacts their areas. So this, we hope, will give us all a voice in protecting our environment. So this is some things that I work on too when I'm not out chasing weird things.
Well, and now I know you're involved with Night of the Paranormal and several other events that that go on here in this market area. But what do you take these shows of yours on the road still, or?
We had a sideshow on the road a couple of years ago that we took up the country, and we played street festivals. It was based on an old-time circus-style sideshow, and with the gas prices and everything, that becomes almost impossible to do, you know, and make any profit off of it. So we took that off. Most of that's stored in my garage now, but we still do stage shows. We still do other events. I will do a magic show once in a while with somebody. We present some unusual exhibits at various places, like we do at Ripley's. So there's always something going on. I also do a lot of presentations for conventions, that sort of thing, and or civic organizations. Do a lot of free stuff too. Do a lot of animal events, raising funds for animal shelters and that sort of thing.
Well, I know that we have mutual friends at Ripley's, and but you've got a pretty good collection of some weird oddities yourself.
Oh yeah, well, I think we got one behind me there.
But do you have a Fiji mermaid, I think, don't you?
Yeah, that's that thing right back there in that case. See,
yeah.
That's the Aruba mermaid, and it's something like the Fiji mermaid that was on exhibit at the Great American Museum of P.T. Barnum in New York before it burnt down. And I think there's something like 12 Fiji mermaids around the country on exhibit now, all claiming to be the original one. My mermaid is known as the Aruba mermaid. It was discovered over 100 years ago, washed up in some seaweed on the island of Aruba. And it finally ended up in a roadside tourist attraction in Florida that went out of business when I-95 was built down the coast. And I acquired this thing in an estate sale. And as you can see, it's absolutely genuine. Believe it or not.
Believe it or not. I'm sure Robert Ripley would love that one. Okay, well, I guess we're running about out of time, and so Charlie, thank you. As always, it's great visiting with you. Appreciate your being here. And well, have a little if you need some. I'm Scott Marlowe. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Conversation with the Master of the Weird, Florida's own Charlie Carlson. Goodbye.